Everybody, this is Rabbitearsblog, and this is my video celebrating the 50th anniversary of the X-Men. Which is strange because at the same time, Doctor Who is celebrating his 50th anniversary, and even though I haven't been watching Doctor Who that long either, I probably might do a video about that someday once I get through this video of the X-Men. I wanted to do this video because, well, it's the X-Men's 50th anniversary, and I've been reading the X-Men comics for a while now, and I've also had exposure of the X-Men through the cartoon series early on, so I just wanted to tell everybody about how I got into the X-Men in the first place, and what I hope to see from this franchise in the future. So pretty much this is what this video is detailing, what I hope to see in the future for the franchise and how I got into it. Okay, so here we go. So I first got to the X-Men series with the 90s cartoon series, X-Men the animated series, and I've been enjoying that show ever since. That was pretty much my first exposure to the X-Men. It introduced me to characters like Jean Grey, Cyclops, Beast, Professor Xavier, Wolverine, Storm, Rogue, Gambit. There's so many characters in that show that I was introduced to, and I really loved all of those characters, especially Wolverine. He was like one of my most favorite X-Men characters at that time, and I remember I used to get up every Saturday morning just to watch X-Men the animated series, because at that time X-Men the animated series was one of the few action shows I actually enjoyed at that time. I mean, I watched The Tick at the time, but I enjoyed X-Men the animated series the most because I love the situations that the X-Men got into. I love the fact that they're mutants who's trying to be superheroes and trying to convince humanity that they're the good guys. That was just an aspect of the X-Men that I've always loved, and I still loved about them as long as I've been reading this franchise. And even after X-Men the animated series ended in 1997, I still went on and watched other X-Men cartoons that would soon come around after the X-Men the animated series went off the air. So in 2000, I started watching X-Men Evolution, and that introduced to me Kitty Pryde and Nightcrawler. Because at the time, when X-Men the animated series came out, they didn't introduce Kitty Pryde. Like, I didn't know who Kitty Pryde was up until X-Men Evolution came out. The same with Nightcrawler, even though he was in the original X-Men cartoon series, but he didn't have many appearances in that show, and it wasn't until X-Men Evolution I started knowing who Nightcrawler was. So X-Men Evolution pretty much introduced to me Kitty Pryde and Nightcrawler and some other newer X-Men characters, and I started really enjoying that show for that reason, for introducing to me more X-Men characters that I didn't know about were in the comics up until, I read the comics years later, but I won't talk about that until later. Anyway, I like the fact with X-Men Evolution, they put the X-Men in a more high school setting. I mean, I know some fans didn't like that, but I personally was okay with that. I like the fact that we saw the X-Men as teenagers, and we still see them fighting crimes as superheroes and stuff like that. And just like X-Men the animated series, I watch X-Men Evolution every time I can get the chance to watch the show. So after X-Men Evolution went off, I started watching Wolverine the X-Men. Now, I didn't watch Wolverine the X-Men until like years later, like 2012, because by the time Wolverine the X-Men came out in 2008, I had lost the Nicktoons Network channel and I couldn't watch it at the time. So finally I was able to watch Wolverine the X-Men, and I enjoyed that show too, even though it focused heavily on Wolverine a bit too much, but I still liked the show for doing something a little different. Wolverine's the leader in this one, not Cyclops. They had darker storylines from X-Men Evolution and, X-Men, the anime series was still closer to the comics than both Wolverine the X-Men and X-Men Evolution combined. But I do like the fact that Wolverine the X-Men was a little darker than X-Men Evolution in a sense, and I was more interested in the storylines in there too. And then afterwards, I saw X-Men the anime series, and this was the first time they made an anime series about the X-Men, because for a long time, the X-Men have been like mainly cartoon, like animated in America most of the time, and this was the first time I saw X-Men cartoon series animated in Japan, and it was really interesting to me because they used Grant Morrison's storyline about how this evil organization used the mutant organs to do some kind of I can't remember exactly what it is. It's been a while since I read New X-Men, but they used the same story from Grant Morrison's run about this evil organization using mutant organs to create some kind of experiment or something like that. But I've enjoyed what X-Men Anime did and sticking close to the source material as much as they could. I mean, they did some things differently here and there, but it still at least was a bit close to the source material in a sense. So I did enjoy X-Men Anime. I especially love how they portray Wolverine in that series, but that's just my opinion. Okay, so now that I talked about how I got into the animated series for the X-Men, I like to talk about the movies. So in 2000, I got into X Men, and that was the first X Men movie they made of all time, and I was really excited to see it because again, it was the first time the X Men had a movie, and I like the way that Hugh Jackman and Halle Berry and Patrick Stewart and all of those portrayed each character. I think they came straight out of the comics. Some of them didn't anyway, and I like seeing the X Men movie format, and so when I heard that they were going to make X-Men 2, I was just really excited about that. And I think I remember liking X-Men 2 way better than X-Men 1 at the time. The story was a little better, the characters were more focused, and it was based off of one of the best storylines of all time, God Loves, Man Kills, but I'll go into more about that later. And then X-Men 3 came out, X-Men The Last Stand. And what happened there was that I was just so upset when all the mutants got killed, or most of the main characters got killed off, and I was like, okay, there's got to be an X-Men 4. There's got to be X-Men 4. They're gonna be coming back because it can't end like this. Um, and I was hoping for X-Men 4 to come out for that reason. But I was kind of disappointed when they decided to go with X-Men Origins Wolverine at the time. And I saw that movie too, and it was, yeah, it was okay. I mean, I can take it, but I can understand why a lot of fans didn't like it. It wasn't really faithful to Wolverine's origin story. But again, at that time, I didn't read much of Wolverine's origin story, so I didn't know exactly how his origin story went. But I could tell there was a lot of plot holes in that movie and stuff like that. But getting off of that, I saw X Men First Class after it, and I really enjoyed that movie. I like the fact that they focused more attention on Professor Xavier and Magneto in this movie, and we saw their backstory about how they met. I mean, it's different from how the previous three movies went about it, but it was still a pretty interesting movie to me, and I enjoyed it. Just for focusing a lot on Professor Xavier and Magneto. And I'm actually pretty excited for Days of Future Past, which is coming out next year, I believe. So I can't wait to see how they're going to tie up the First Class franchise and the original trilogy together, and how they're going to mesh all those characters together in one movie. That'd be interesting to see. So I can't wait to see Days of Future Past coming out next year. All right. Now I'd like to talk about how I got into the comic books. Now, I didn't get into the X-Men comics until 2011, I believe, because at the time when I was watching the cartoons, I didn't really care about the comics at the time, or at least I didn't care about reading them or checking them out. So I started reading the X-Men comics in 2011, and my first X-Men comic I've read was Astonishing X-Men by Joss Whedon. Um, and I picked up that book because I had actually saw a motion comic about it. That was how I first got introduced to it, when I was watching a motion comic of Astonishing X-Men. And I love the story of Gifted so much that I was like, well, I have to check out the rest of the series in the comic book. So that's when I picked up Gifted, and I read it again in the comic book format, and I loved it. And then I picked up Dangerous and Torn and Unstoppable after that, and I found myself falling in love with this run. I mean, all the characters were done so well. It was hilarious, it was tragic at the same time, and I really loved that. And it also made me love Colossus. This was actually the first time I really got into Colossus's character, because just like Nightcrawler, he was introduced in X-Men the Anime Series in the 90s, but he didn't really make much of an appearance that much. And it wasn't until I read Joss Whedon's run on Astonishing X-Men I really got into his character, and now he's one of my most favorite X-Men characters. I mean, Wolverine's still a favorite character of mine too, but Colossus is starting to rank up there along with Kitty Pryde and Nightcrawler. So that was the first time Astonishing X-Men was like the first time I got introduced to Colossus a little more clearly, and I started loving his character a lot because of that run. And after I read Astonishing X-Men, I started reading some of the older classic X-Men storylines, especially the ones written by Chris Claremont. And I started with the Dark Phoenix saga. And now that's one of my most favorite storylines from the X-Men comics. Next to Joss Whedon, at least, next to Joss Whedon's run. I loved in the Dark Phoenix saga how Jean Grey becomes the Dark Phoenix and Cyclops and the X-Men are trying to stop her from destroying everything. And the story still goes into the emotions of all the characters and how they feel about Jean Grey becoming the Dark Phoenix. The Dark Phoenix, and that story was just really emotional and action packed for me, and I really loved it. And it's like seriously one of my most favorite X-Men storylines of all time. And then after I read the Dark Phoenix saga, I read God Loves, Man Kills, the one I told you X-Men 2 movie was based off of. And I love that story too. It was actually the most intense X-Men story I've read so far. Actually relating a lot to the real racism and prejudice that happens in the real world. And I love how it parallels to the X-Men struggles in trying to be accepted to humanity because they're mutants and they're hated and feared by humanity. And I like how that story, how God Loves, Man Kills, really tackled that story. So that's another one of my favorite storylines from the X-Men. And then I read Days of Future Past, which was the story that really introduced Kitty Pryde into the X-Men, or at least had Kitty Pryde get a more prominent role with the X-Men, because before she didn't have much of a prominent role when she was introduced in Dark Phoenix Saga, but she gets one in Days of Future Past, and I really enjoyed the storyline about how the X-Men are trying to stop this terrible future from happening, from preventing Senator Robert Kelly from getting assassinated, and how Kitty's future self has to go into Kitty's mind to stop it. So I really like that storyline, and it's another one of my favorite X-Men storylines of all time on my list. Um, After I read that series, I started reading a lot more X-Men comics after that, and there was a lot of good X-Men comics I read, like Mutant Massacre. It's just so much that X-Men comics I have been reading for the past few years now. Now I haven't really got into the recent X-Men comics, like the ones that started in 2010s to onward, since I'm still trying to catch up with the ones in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, so I'm still trying to catch up on those. But hopefully I'll get around to reading the recent X-Men comics. I'm definitely planning on reading Uncanny X-Force by Rick Remender, so I'm definitely picking up that book soon, hopefully. But there's just a lot of X-Men comics that I want to read, and I hope that I can get around to most of them. So, what do I hope for this franchise in the future? I hope that the X-Men still goes on for another 50 years or so, because this is a great franchise. I really loved all the characters in there. I can relate to each and every one of them. I like the fact that each X-Men comes from a different country, like Colossus comes from Russia, Nightcrawler comes from Germany, Wolverine comes from Canada, Storm comes from Africa, and so on and so forth. I love that, and we can see so many different points of view between all these characters, and their struggles in trying to be accepted to humanity. I also love Professor Xavier's dream about, I want all mutants and humanity to be together, not fighting against each other. So that's what's so inspirational to me about the X-Men series, is that they're trying to be more accepting to the world that hates them, but they're being superheroes and trying to do stuff, and while having a lot of issues with each other but still working together at the same time. It's just that aspect of the X-Men I really love, and I hope to see more of those type of stories from the X-Men in the future. So what do you like about the X-Men? How would you celebrate the X-Men's 50th anniversary? How did you get into the X-Men series, and what do you hope would happen to the X-Men in the future? I hope you enjoyed this video, and I just want to say happy 50th anniversary, X-Men! This is Rabbitearsblog, and I'll see you later.